So let me call the meeting to order. Thank you, Jean. And as a first, before we get started, we do not have our secretary today. Would anyone volunteer to take the minutes for today's meeting?
I will.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Barbara.
All right, so the first item on the agenda is to accept the agenda, to make an addition if necessary. Before doing so, would anyone like to add something to the agenda?
Yes, I'd like to add an item to be put on there about concerning a letter to be drawn up, to be sent to the different boards in town and possibly the social service director in regard to the ARPA funds covering the item 4, the wastewater and storm drainage, sewerage, the infrastructure part.
Second.
Okay, so let's add that under new business. And it can be titled Letter to Municipal Boards. And I think Matt was taking your amendment as an amendment and a motion and seconding it. Did anyone have anything else to add to the agenda?
So I'm expecting emergency management, either David or Eric or both of them, to be passing along a document that they proposed to the Board of Selectmen last night, that they were sending it to ARPA, the ARPA committee, so it would go to all the members and the inbox. And that was less than 10 minutes ago, so I don't see it. So I guess we'll just hold off until we get it, have it in hand.
I think that's fine, as we wouldn't have had a chance to read it before the meeting. And I really am very conscious of the time that you all are devoting to this committee. And if we're going to have weekly meetings, I really would like to keep the meetings to an hour 15 at the very most. And so I'd like us to try and move through the business without having to review things during the meeting that we haven't had the chance to do. Okay, so if that is all, then, and if Joe, if indeed we heard you correctly that you were making a motion to accept the agenda.
Yes.
Then Matt has seconded. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries, and we move on to item 3, which is to approve the minutes from last week. Have you all had a chance to review the minutes from last week? And if so, are there any changes that need to be made before we vote on them?
I move to accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
Thanks, Barbara. I'm sorry, did you second, Matt?
I seconded.
Jean did it. Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? And seeing none, the motion carries. We can move on to public comment, but there are no members outside of this committee present, so I think we're going to move on from public comment pretty quickly and get right into our business. Joe, I don't know what additional you might have to report. I hope that you were able to see the email that I sent earlier with Sharon's, what the town of Sharon is doing.
Yes.
Any other new information that we should take into account, and also what did you all think of what Sharon was doing?
Sure. I don't have any new information to add to the summary from last week. I reviewed all the information that you had sent, Connie, for Sharon as to how their committee is handling the ARPA funds, and it's my opinion is I think it's a pretty good plan. It sounds very organized as to how they have it set up, how they are running the survey, as far as the response to getting a good response to it with sending it out through a special website. And the questions themselves, yes and no. I think some of them were like really, really, were done well. They got right direct to addressing things. Others, I don't know. I mean, setting up a system where asking per people as to what their dollars and cents loss is, and then having to go afterwards to verify that. It seems to me that it's opening up a lot of different problems. That aspect, I didn't agree with that much, but to have a plan organized like that so quickly, and to have a meeting set up afterwards to gauge the the results, and to have it all submitted within a time frame that impressed me, and that's my comments on that.
Okay, and I think we should hold off on discussing survey questions until we move on to that point of the agenda. Anyone else with comments on that?
Not really. I thought it was nice. It was good. It seemed comprehensive.
I did ask Jill about their expenditures in connection with the web landing page, which is really just a repackage of some of the material that is available on the Town of Sharon's website. But I thought that the presentation was maybe a little more friendly than what you typically see on a town webpage. So perhaps that was the reason for doing that. She said that their web developer did it for, I can't quite remember, but she was saying that there was maybe like a $300 expenditure, and that that they really don't mind at all if we just copy them verbatim. She said they feel no ownership over it, and would be glad of being helpful to another town, and also willing, to collaborate if there are opportunities for our towns to do so on this rollout. But anyway.
Connie, I had a question on Sharon's.
Yeah.
Now, they're having a community meeting afterwards. Is that something we're planning as well?
So we were planning on doing focus groups, and perhaps you saw Patricia's notes on that.
I did.
And there were, specifically there were 5 groups that we thought we would solicit feedback from. Patricia, after seeing Sharon's, did mention that it might be beyond the bandwidth of our committee to host 5 separate focus groups, and maybe doing a community meeting for input might be better. I think we can debate the merits of that during the focus group time. I think they each come with their own challenges. But I think that, I don't know how you feel about having a meeting to report out what we are going to report to the Board of Selectmen, or whether that's a step that would change what we report out. I hadn't really thought about that.
I guess my understanding is whatever our information we submit though to the Board of Selectmen, initially we were told that them and the Board of Finance would then make a decision. And just all the research I did, one of the things I did see was there was groups that felt like they were left out of the system, because some municipalities just did what they wanted with the money without public input, did what they thought was best. I just think to avoid that, having a community meeting makes sense. The taxpayers and the residents can all come in and anything we may have missed, not so much to review what we're doing, but an opportunity for the public to see what the outline is, make sure that we've heard from all the sources and before the I don't know that it'd be right for the Board of Selectmen just to make a decision without the public input. Just through, I saw a lot of people saying that they did not get the survey, or there was a reason why their information wasn't included in the survey, the specifics. I think up Pittsfield, Mass is a huge one where they're trying to overturn the results. So I'm just throwing that out there. I just think it's always good to keep the public, give them an opportunity to get involved.
Could I just comment on that? Could I just comment on what Matt said?
You can comment. Yes, comment.
Yeah, what Matt was saying about the public having input into that. In fact, they do have input through the use of the survey, and it's kind of like we're almost like at like a mental block with the survey. We haven't formulated it, and it hasn't been sent out. But that would be the opportunity for the public to comment on how, on their thoughts as to how the funds should be spent, and using that, and then the focus groups. It's that could always be morphed into something like a hearing or something like that, or just continue to have it that way too. But as far as getting feedback from the public through the survey, that's the opportunity. And then once everything is approved by the government, the town officials, then a meeting could be called to voice approval. That makes sense to me.
I agree, Joe.
Other opinions? Jean and Barbara, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, Matt, if there's a gap that you think that is going to happen, that a gap of people that aren't going to be offered an opportunity to comment or provide feedback through the survey and then through the 5 focus groups, or however many focus groups that we end up with.
Well, Gina, my years of going to public meetings, town meetings for the annual vote and those, if you look at the makeup of the group that attends most of those meetings, it's one group for the most part, always has been.
Mhm.
And so I just want to make sure that out of my research going online to look for online surveys that other municipalities near our population range had done, one of the things I saw was issues of groups feeling like the whole process kind of slipped by it, or that the survey had specifics but didn't include theirs, and then it was just done. Some towns just didn't even involve the public with even knowing about the money, and just used it and did things. And then there was public outcry afterwards. So I just think it would be nice if once the committee is done, however it's done, whether the public hearing or public committee meeting is before the select or maybe to endorse it, like a town meeting.
Right, so that could be a recommendation that comes out of this committee, right?
I
Did
don't
you-
actually, I
do
think
you-
it's a good idea. I mean, Matt, I hear what you're saying about
Right,
people feeling
giving
like
more
they might be left
opportunity.
out. And actually, the POCD survey, which just came back, the results are out and posted. If you read about the demographics of, over 400 people who answered the survey, 78% of them do not have a child under 18 living in their household. So, it's a very skewed demographic that answered the survey. I don't know that we would get a different demographic necessarily if we held a community meeting, but I think it is a good opportunity for the committee to report out to the public and probably prior to going to the, delivering the report to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, just to say, we asked and here's what you said. And
Mhm.
so here's what we're going to recommend. And just, it's an accountability step as much as it is a solicitation step.
Thanks.
Can we do it in our time frame though is another, that's the other question, because, all of this falls right around the busy times of the holidays. And so,
Right.
It's hard to, but we can try.
Yeah, I think it's worth trying if we feel like we're gonna, yeah, I think I totally see what you're saying, Matt.
Thank you.
There's no reason to not try, I guess is really what I'm trying to say.
I have a question on, probably Barbara can answer this, is the time frames on the written reports. What are they? Are they October?
They're
to
on,
send a-
I had created a timeline and I had emailed it to everyone, and that information is on the timeline. So it's in the Dropbox or Google Drive, the timeline. So all the dates are right in there for you.
So for some reason, December 30, the end of December sticks in my mind about a certain dead. Now, is that when all these recommendations have to be submitted?
Jean, can you make me a host so I can share the timeline?
I think you're conflating two different things. There's a
Yes.
timeline that was created by the federal government and that has specific reporting requirements. I believe the December timeline that you're thinking about is a timeline that we have self-imposed on ourselves.
Right.
So I guess what I'm asking is when does a report have to be submitted?
The first
To
one,
the-
the first report that has to be submitted to the federal government by me has to be submitted by October 31.
But the date for the report that we plan to submit to the Board of Selectmen that we're reverse engineering was, I think the January, was it the January meeting?
I believe so.
I thought we were shooting for December. But if we have, if it's flexible, I would say that
Definitely
it
is
would make
flexible.
sense to come out to the committee. Come out to the public with what the committee has found before delivering the final report.
Yeah, the only reason why I bring these up is because I don't want to blow past any of the deadlines and then find out afterwards that, oops, we didn't do, we forgot to do this, or we didn't do this timely. That's all the reason
Well,
why I mentioned that.
So the federal
is the-
grant reporting that Barbara has to do is not dependent on the report that we would be submitting to the Board of Selectmen.
Right, Joe. So we are making an assessment and possibly some recommendations for the select board and the Board of Finance to consider, but they will be the ones making the actual decisions.
Mhm.
And this date here is, I mean, it sounds a long way off, but this is the date that you're talking about, Joe, where if funding is not obligated by December 31st of 2024, then unobligated funding must be returned, which we want to avoid doing because that is not in our town's best interest. So, so it sounds like a long timeline. It's really not. It should go fast, but I think it's probably worth it for our job and needs assessment to take the time that it takes to really query the community and make sure that we get that right, so that there aren't, you know, especially so there will not be, as Matt was saying, you know, questions asked after the fact, you know, that make members of the public suspicious about what was done and leave them feeling left out.
Yeah, one last thing that I wanted to mention too is that in the plan that Sharon came up with, it seemed very organized and having a specific dates down there where to schedule a meeting and then to have everything complete by December. I mean, that sounded to me like very efficient and orderly and so forth. And that's all I'll say about that matter.
Yeah, I think we agree. So I think then what we're feeling is the need to move to the next agenda item, which is the survey development, which we, you know, I think we will all feel a lot better once we launch our survey.
Yes. Can I ask a question? Do you know, does Jill have a PDF or the mock-up or proof of the info card that they mailed?
I can get it. Yeah.
I would be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I
Because
think,
that's a really reliable way to reach every single household in town.
do we have a budget to do that mailing?
I have a small contingency budget, but we can, I don't know why we couldn't ask the Board of Selectmen to consider, you know, a small budget of X for this mailing card to come from the ARPA, to be paid for by the ARPA funds. Would that be eligible, Barbara?
Probably, but I don't think the cost of a mailing would be so excessive that we wouldn't be able to find it somewhere else in our budget.
Right.
I just
It's
think
a
we could
few $100s.
manage that without an issue.
Yeah.
Especially if it's postcards, because postcards aren't even the same
Right.
as first class mail.
And
I did look back on my email while we were talking, and the $300 expense that I recalled Jill talking about was not for the website design, because that was contributed by a volunteer. They paid $300 for a domain name in order to get
Ooh.
that domain.
that's a lot of money.
I will just offer up that we do have a dedicated page on our town website for our committee. There's information on there already. There's an email link, so people can just click on the link and send an email to us. So I'm not sure we need to go the extra expense. We just may need to put the URL, is that what it's called, on the card, so that when people get it, they know where to look.
Right. And I think
Yeah.
we can add some content to the webpage. So there's some informational content there as well as we move along.
And if we mention it in every meeting, like every P and Z meeting, every Board of Finance meeting, every Selectmen's meeting, the information will be getting out there.
Mhm.
So anyway,
We can create a PSA video.
yeah.
Anyone want to
Lord.
star in that?
No, thanks.
So yeah, and I think the postcard should have a QR code on it, but we'll look and see what Sharon did. And
Yeah.
I don't know that they have it yet, because she said that they were just getting to the point where they were doing the design work. The survey that the survey questions that I sent you earlier today, she said, you know, now we have to get a designer and get them translated into Spanish. And so I think that even though they have this plan laid out, you know, they're still taking steps before they do that actual mailing.
So it hasn't been launched. Their survey hasn't been launched.
No, I think they just did this 2 nights ago.
Yeah,
You know, they made these
I-
decisions.
yeah, the email thread looks like it was just Monday that they went before their board of selectmen approved their outreach plan. So we're not,
Which
they didn't-
we don't need to do that, right?
right. Nope. It was
Okay.
not in the charge.
That would-
It was to
that
do
would
the
bog
needs
it down a bit.
assessment.
Okay, so survey development.
So
How are we
survey
going to move
question.
this forward, guys?
So I populated some of those survey questions that we had seen last week. I didn't get a chance to take Jill's and pull it out of the PDF and put it in here. So if you want, I can share the screen. I'll share the Word document.
I really don't want to discuss the
Oh,
questions
okay.
here. I
All
would
right,
like
I
us
will-
to have a copy of the questions that we can consider prior to the meeting. So one of the things about this meeting being on Wednesday that's so fantastic is that it gives us 2 work days and a weekend before our meetings need to be noticed, which really means that, I mean, I'm the kind of person who does the work before the meeting, like, you know, the day of the meeting. It's like you put a meeting on calendar, so you do the work, but we really can't do that with this
Okay.
meeting. We really have to have the work happen after the meeting, like right after the meeting, so that it can be shared and we can be ready for discussion.
Got it.
Or else we'll end up with 4-hour meetings, which
Right.
we really cannot do.
Right. Got it. Okay. So I will,
So
I'll get all of this into
I mean,
one
I don't-
place and then upload it and email everybody.
I don't think it'll be hard to agree on questions because we know what the questions look like because we've seen all the other towns and they
Mhm.
seem to be working. And
Mhm.
so, you know, I don't really see it being, you know, a really long discussion.
Mhm.
But I'd rather not have us wordsmithing, you know, while we're all on Zoom together being recorded. That's,
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think that's a good use of anyone's time, even
Sure.
the watcher, the viewer.
Sure.
Joe,
Do we know what some of the questions are already?
Well, it's really a compilation of all those documents so far.
Oh, so specifically, Jean, do you know? What, like, for example, what would one of the questions be?
So there's one of them is what projects will transform, can, and help our community recover from the negative effects of COVID-19? And then it lists all the different buckets: water infrastructure, premium pay, town infrastructure, parks and rec, community health and wellness, assistance to nonprofits, workforce development, community safety. That one came right from the New Milford survey. There's demographic questions, which are just standard. Are you a Kent resident? But includes a yes, no, prefer not to answer. There's a race, ethnicity. There's all of the federal buckets and then a prefer not to answer. There's the age buckets. Optional question to ask for their email address and will include, you know, this is optional. We only ask if we want to follow up or have a question about your responses, but allowing people to be anonymous is going to improve the response rate. Question: are you completing the survey as a business, resident, or not-for-profit organization? I don't know if we want to have just the 3 because we had some conversation last week about those different groups as it relates to the focus groups. So I don't know if we want to just keep it to the 3.
So we
Or-
could actually go and look up what the questions are on the New Milford website as like like what happened to see what questions Sharon was you know, drawing up.
No,
other
I've
words, what
pulled
I'm
them
asking,
all into, I've pulled them all into one Word document. And then what I'll also do is add all of the Sharon survey questions into that Word document, and then I'll put it up on in the drive.
so we don't
And
know.
remember, we're shooting for 10 questions or less.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because we want
Yep.
this to be something that
Wait.
people can do in 5 to 10 minutes max.
I would say 5 minutes max. People, the data on how response rates like take a serious dive at that 6-7 minute mark is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, Matt.
So just so I can follow, so Jean's gonna produce the draft survey, get it out to us, and before next meeting, we can identify if there's anything we hate, anything we feel is left out, and we'll finalize from there. Is that where we're going?
Yes,
mean,
and
Jean's
I
got
think
enough
that it would
content.
be. I
think so.
would assume so. We've got model questions from all over the place, so we
Yep.
just
Okay.
have to pick them. You know,
Yep.
make tweaks that are particular to Kent. And if if we share a Word doc in that Google Drive, we can make comments on it.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So, I would not, I would ask everyone to be respectful and not to edit. Let's not even maybe do track changes, but let's use the comment function in order to make comments. And I think that it's probably best not to go crazy on grammar and usage unless there is terminology
Don't worry about
that
me.
somehow bears mentioning. That really what we would like to do is, within the next 2 weeks, be ready to send out that survey. So,
Okay.
so
I think
we're
Matt
working
knows that
under that.
I can string a decent
Yeah, she
sentence
is the
together.
grammar person.
All I meant is that,
No, I know it.
and maybe
I
this is
got
just
you.
for me, is that we're not correcting a test. We're looking at the content.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just, Jean, would you need any help with this? Any assistance or anything anybody can help you with?
No, I'm good. I need to pretty much just copy and paste the Sharon questions into the document and post it up into the folder, which should maybe take a half an hour just to make sure everything's tidy and it's readable when I do the paste, but I'll get it up there tonight.
No, I was just gonna say, if you need any help, I'd be willing to help.
Okay. Yeah, if I get into trouble, I'll shoot you an email for sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, are we ready to move on? Great. Thanks, Jean. Okay, so the focus group planning, I thought Patricia's document was pretty good.
Mhm.
I feel like we should discuss her comment about, is this doable, running 5 focus group meetings, or are we being overly ambitious? And then I think also, there are questions that she raises about how to populate the focus groups. And, her thought was to come out to the general public and just ask for volunteers is probably not going to get us what we want. So we may want to, think, with some particularity about who we should invite and who we definitely want in the room for the focus groups. So I'll open it that way.
I agree with that. I think the focus groups definitely should be open to the public, but there should also be 5 people, 6 people that are targeted and invited to participate. That way, hopefully we'll get maybe a few of the general public and we'll get those 5 or 6 focused people. I don't think it's untenable to do that many, but I do think the logistics are going to be a little bit difficult to do 5 focus groups, but maybe what we have to do is set aside a Saturday and do them on the weekend to make it doable for people.
Mm.
So are you thinking, Barbara, do them stacked, like all the same day or 2 days and just do, I think that's probably the only way that we're going to pull it off as a small
Yes.
committee.
Yes, because
Um,
once we get into the groove of it and we get going
Right.
with it,
Yeah, I think after the,
I,
creating a sort of a template for how the focus groups are going to go, so that we're really making sure we have that guided conversation, so it doesn't become a, let's throw everything up on the wall and see what sticks kind of thing.
I have a question about how that works in terms of the town and what our obligations are for FOIA. Can we have a focus group meeting that would not be recorded and open to all, or what?
I think
What
so,
are the
because
rules
we're
around
not
that?
conducting business. We aren't conducting any
Right.
business.
I'd
I
have to
think
check
that
with
that
Randy
might
then.
be. I think that might be more, make it more approachable for some.
Mhm.
In terms of being able to openly share comments. So, if it's possible to do it without, recording and minutes and warnings and all of that, then
I mean-
it just kind of is friendlier.
There's going to have to be some sort of a note taker, minute taker, something of the focus group so that the general comments and concerns that were raised in the
Can
group
be-
are relayed. But I also think that the people in the group should be anonymous under that guise so that they can speak freely without any
Yeah.
worries.
Right.
Well, I think Patricia's recommendation was that there be two of us in each meeting. One person facilitating and one person note taking,
Mhm.
which is usually, the facilitator is not able to take notes. Those two roles
Yeah.
can't be the same
Right.
person.
Right.
Joe,
Yeah, Patricia, there was a lot of good information about focus groups that informed me about just, what they are, how they're run and so forth. So, there's a lot of good information, but, my concern is that I think the devil is in the details for this, is that, and then when you go into trying to set up like the format and for example, we'll say the location. Well, where would the location be for this? Would this be like a town hall event, or would this be a library, or would this be a community? Because then you have to deal with the pandemic restrictions and so forth. And for different locations, it would be different restrictions. So that would have to be settled.
Well, I think it
Next,
has to be a town hall event. I think it has to be. Because you want to
Well-
lend some aura of privacy to it. So if you had it at the library and there's other people checking out books,
Right.
that wouldn't be comfortable. I think the town hall meeting room is definitely the place to have this.
well, I myself, I don't know what the policy is now in regard to, what restrictions are. In fact, is there a town policy that exists now for the public for meetings?
Just for
I
mask
guess,
wearing.
Jean, you would know.
Yeah, it's masks.
Okay, so
There's a
mask
mask requirement for the buildings.
But the
Okay,
town
so-
hall is already being cleaned on a regular basis, and we can certainly set up our cleaning person to come in and do what we call a COVID clean before and after the meeting. So I just think the town hall is the safest place to conduct these types of activities.
I see. And then after that, there's the matter of the time, how much time needs to be spent on this. And, it may just turn out that it might be, able to condense everything down to a 90-minute focus group, which combines different groups if the response is not, if you don't get a response that merits to have 5 different separate focus groups. That's just a thought. So like the time frame, and then after that, there's also how, I guess you'd call it the production of the whole thing. Who's going to moderate, facilitate this? Where would you find them? How would it be possible to have somebody from a local radio station interview the people? Do a moderator, or do a podcast. This is all would be included in the costs, and this would cost production of the whole focus group, matter. And so that's what I'm saying. The details would have to be.
If I was
finalized.
understanding Patricia correctly, I would, and she's not here, but I would understand her to be, very much against having, a radio broadcast or any kind of podcast. The idea of these focus groups, Joe, is that we'll, by that time, know what the people are telling us from the survey. So we'll have some early indication of what people are telling us the needs are. And so the idea of the focus groups is not really to do that exact same thing, but to kind of build on that information by saying, hey, you group that shares some of these commonalities, we're hearing this. Is that true? Tell us more about that need, so that we can understand more deeply what that is. And that will inform our recommendations. And so the idea is really to create an atmosphere that is friendlier, open, that encourages, really open conversation, as opposed to anything controlled or theatrical.
Agreed.
And so, and I think that Patricia was thinking that we would be the moderators and note takers, although,
Agreed.
that there's no assumption that everyone is equally comfortable in those roles. But I think that that was what she was thinking, at least as a jumping off point.
Yeah, and some of the conversations may go into, someone losing their job or struggling because they've had a loss in income in their household. And those are pretty personal, private things that if you were to have it simulcast via podcast, I would be worried about people wanting to share that sort of information if they knew it was going out over the airwaves.
And we will, of course, like any focus group, make sure that we set the ground rules, so that it's
That's important.
clear that people aren't expected to, if they're not comfortable, they don't need to share those kinds of details. But if they do, that, there's it doesn't leave this room kind of respect. And there's a level of trust that you hope to, to set that with the tone of the meeting. But again, the meeting itself, the focus groups shouldn't be our only source of how many people lost their jobs. We can be talking to the nonprofit service providers about, can you kind of quantify for us, what some of what you saw in the community. So we may not be teasing out these individual damage claims, in the context of the focus groups. The focus groups may help just amplify our understanding of, what that need is across the community.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara.
So just to maybe point Joe in another direction too, I also created a document and put it up in our share file, and the name of my document is leading/hosting a focus group. So I did some of the same homework that Patricia did, but I sort of went in a different direction, a little bit more along the lines of how we create a group and how we host it. So you can certainly read that information in the shared drive. I also put in the shared drive, just sort of as an aside, a document that I have that's called Compliance and Reporting Guidance. And I think that gives a lot of information about the type of information that we need, or I'm going to need, for reporting purposes.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara, for doing that. I saw that that was in there, and I found like a webinar, like a slideshow that reviews some of that material too. So, you know, but I know you'll be studying that more closely than everyone. I also printed out the interim rule. I didn't read it though yet. Sorry.
I reread it.
Did you find the answer to
Well,
the questions about infrastructure improvements and whether they had to benefit disadvantaged groups, or whether it could just be groups that were disparately impacted?
well, there's two prongs to that whole piece. And one is that if you can do infrastructure improvements in a portion of your community that immediately impacts the underserved, that's like the gold star. The second way to funnel money into that is to prove that your revenues have been impacted and that this was something that you had on the books to do. And because your revenues have been impacted, you haven't been able to do these improvements. So with the amount of money that we're actually getting through this ARPA fund, it wouldn't make much of an indent in any infrastructure project that we even tried to undertake. So I think that would be, in my recommendation, that would be sort of the tail end recommendation, to put the money in that arena. I think our local businesses and local taxpayers have been impacted, and just my own personal opinion, I'd like to see the money go to them.
All right, well, we'll
like-
know a lot more soon.
Yeah, could I just comment on that? The Barbara, you say underserved. How do you define underserved? I mean, that's kind of vague. I mean, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's more of a federal guideline. And when they talk about the underserved community, they talk about people who have food insecurity or housing insecurity or job insecurity, people that don't have the means and the ways, people don't have cars or transportation.
So
They
like,
consider them our underserved community.
so
Yeah,
like,
it's not Barbara's definition. It is
Right,
it's
it's
an
a federal
actual
definition.
definition.
Right.
so to take that and then to use that in regard to Kent, who in Kent would be defined as being underserved?
The only people that I know of that are obvious to me would probably be the Scotticook tribe. I'm sure there's others, but that's the most obvious to me.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned that once before, and it's not clear to me exactly what the status of the Indian tribe is. Are they a fully self-governing entity? Because they say the Indian governments, they're self-regulated. They don't fall under the government policies. Is that what
I don't know.
what
I was
the-
just trying to
the
answer your
Indian tribe-
question. You asked me for an underserved population, and that's what came to my mind. I'm sure the other people that actually live here in Kent would be able to come up with other groups of people.
Right, there are a number of
Yeah,
underserved populations within the geographic community of Kent. And Joe, just to speak a little bit to your question, the, when a tribe is a federally recognized tribe, that's when there's the, I think maybe you're thinking of that sovereignty term possibly.
Yes.
So they have state recognition. They do not yet have the federal recognition.
So that, then for my understanding, then they're not a self-entity. They're in other words, their property, they pay taxes to the town of Kent for their property taxes. Is that correct?
You know, I'd
think
have to, right.
Rather
I'm
than
not sure about all those
speculate on
details.
whether this particular group is an underserved group, it would probably make sense for all of us to review the definitions and, you know, to
Yeah.
come back that way, because I think that at this point we're just speculating. And I do believe that our job is to assess the needs of the community. So I would encourage us all to think broadly in terms of what that means for Kent's community. And then not to get too bound up in definitions. Okay. So with the focus group planning, though, I want to make sure that this works with our time frame, because I think that initially when we were thinking we'd have to have the survey, we'd want to know the answers to the survey. Survey goes out November 1st or whatever, that was our thinking, have it done by October, leave it open for a month. So at that point, you're in December. Do we want to do focus groups in December? Especially knowing now that we're going to we're going to add a report out to the community, or do you think it would be better to do focus groups in January? And I don't know that I have an opinion on that. I just want to put it out there, you know, as we're thinking this through.
Do we have a total number of people that are going to be involved in the focus groups? Because I think that will determine how many focus groups we will be needing.
We do, Joe. The number that was batted around was that, you know, a group of 10 or fewer would be good. And Barbara just suggested that having 5 to 6 people or, you know, categories, you know, somebody from this organization or somebody representing this, having 5 or 6, you know we want to hear from for each of the focus groups would be good. So we're talking, you know, roughly, you know, 50 people total, and you know, and 30 of those are people that we are, you know, picking because we know that they'll have information that would be helpful to us.
I see. So for the focus groups, there'll be say like 5 to 10 people, and it wouldn't be just like 2 or 3 people, you know, because otherwise it wouldn't be worthwhile to be spending as much time for, you know, just for a couple of people. I mean, how much information are you going to get from that?
Is that a question?
Well, it's a rhetorical question. I mean, in other words, what I'm saying is if the focus group is only going to be for 2 or 3 people, is it worthwhile to have a specific focus group for just 2 or 3 people, and then or just combine some of them? You know, in other words,
Right.
limit
So,
them. Doesn't that make sense?
So I see your rhetorical question. And I think that's, so back to the question of December or January.
I vote for January,
January, I vote for as well.
because I think that'll
Yeah.
give us, as you pointed out earlier, Connie, time to get the survey, compile the information, sort of tweak what we want our focus groups to focus on based on the information we get back from the survey. That'll give us time to contact people. Hopefully people will be, you know, done with their holiday stuff by the middle of January, and we can schedule the focus groups on a weekend and get them all done. It's going to be a marathon weekend, but I think it'll be a lot of information and it'll be good.
Yeah, and the reality of that Thanksgiving to New Year's 7-ish weeks is it's tough
We would
to,
do it, but everybody would be grumpy,
and
Okay.
grumbling.
Yeah.
So, given that, I think that it's fine if, for now, unless there's more to say about the focus groups, that we suspend our discussion on this until Patricia's back. You know, maybe rely on her to start to organize like a wish list and think about how we're going to reach out and when we're going to schedule and etc. Is that good?
Yes.
Okay, so new business and the possibility of a letter out to our municipal boards. Joe, does hearing what Barbara had just said about underserved communities change your thinking on that at all? Or do we have more work to do
I mean,
before?
I don't get the what was the question?
Well, because I think your idea of sending a letter to our municipal boards about infrastructure needs was predicated on your reading of the ARPA guidelines as allowing for expenditures in, categories like, extending the sewer and water and broadband. And, so we know those things are listed in the statute itself. But at this point, our reading seems to indicate that we would want to, if any expenditures like that were made, that they would need to be targeted so that they reached underserved people in our community. Is that fair to say?
Here's my thinking on that. Okay, the guidelines, which the ARPA guidelines, which we've read about, they do cover part 4. It says to make necessary water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure investments, upgrades, and investments. Now, who would know better about that than the specific boards and commissions in the town as to whether or not they need upgrades or investments? So here's my thinking about sending a letter. In fact, I would even volunteer to make a draft of it to send to the boards in town, inquiring whether or not there is a need for upgrades or investments in any of their facilities or parts and so forth, such as like the Conservation Board in regard to like clean water, the Clean Water Act, and if anything that needs to be upgraded so they will meet their the regulations which which need to be met, or the Sewer Commission if they need any upgrades and so forth. And they would bring these matters up before their regular monthly meetings to get input from their members or from the directors or so forth about this, because it specifically allows the ARPA funds to be used for water, stormwater especially, and for sewer needs. So this is my thinking, to inquire if they have any recommendations to and so forth. Yep.
Right, but the second part of that is that the expenditures in those categories are meant to target, they're meant to serve underserved people. And so the risk is, Joe, that we don't want to make an expenditure that the federal government then tells us after the fact is ineligible. And so, we really need to be careful in figuring out the interpretation of that modifier, that it must benefit underserved populations, because it seems like you can't just make an improvement. You have to make an improvement if it serves underserved populations.
These are this is to solicit recommendations. The end result is the board and the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen are going to be determining how the money is spent. This is just strictly to solicit recommendations.
So I don't see any reason to not reach out to the boards and commissions, but it would need to be clear to them in the letter what the IFR says, so that there's not.
Yeah, I think
confusion.
that we don't want to lend the, impression that
Right.
it's anything goes, because
Right.
I think that is how you subject yourself to that kind of questioning from the community. If if the materials that you put out, if, the representations that you're making aren't crystal clear about what would be eligible and what would not. Matt?
This is why I'm saying that I would submit a draft of it ahead of time for the committee to look at.
I agree with Joe. If he wants to submit a draft, that's fine. But based on the amount of money we're talking about here and what the goal, as I understand it, Connie, and I'm already hearing these discussions that are happening, like at the Board of Selectmen, talking about using some of the funds for emergency management, and P&Z want to use some funds for tablets or laptops or something. That money will disappear so quick, and it won't get to the people that really need it. And that's my concern as well. The more you flash the pocketbook in front of different people, they will find ways to spend the money. They'll come up with a reason why they need it, and then you have to tell them you're not getting it. And it just causes more heartache for the committee, probably for the committee, because the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance are going to make the decision anyways. I think a lot of that stuff, if it should have been paid with tax out of the taxpayers' money, it should have been included in the budget, and it shouldn't. This is special funds with special restrictions, and I think it definitely is not stuff to make up for the lack of funding because of it didn't pass the Board of Selectmen or Board of Finance approval. That's all I got to say.
Jean, as you develop the survey, maybe there are ways, and maybe you can look at the sample questions to see if the sample questions kind of poke at some of those infrastructure issues. I do remember seeing in some model questions about broadband and access, to the internet and other communications services. And so maybe there's a way to tease out whether there are populations in our community that are impacted by those kinds of needs before we make a formal, a letter to a board means that it comes up and is discussed in a meeting, and, then the horse is out of the gate. And I think that Matt's right in many ways. That's an invitation to come up with projects that may not be, may have no chance of being funded with this money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll have that in mind as I get these in there.
I see no harm in drafting the letter, Joe. If you want to draft the letter and we can have it and hold it, and the timing on when something like that gets sent can, it doesn't have to, we can continue to think about it, and we can think about whether there is an appropriate time to ask those questions somewhere down the line.
Well, my understanding is that, and this has been proven, is that different towns, in fact, it's even documented in how the other towns have been setting up how they're funding using their ARPA funds, and information was solicited from the Board of Finance, from the Board of Selectmen already, because some of the people on these committees have been on the ARPA board. So, they have had input in various towns already.
Okay, do you want to try your hand at drafting a letter, and then we can continue to discuss it?
Sure.
Matt, is that okay with you? You had your hand
Yeah,
up
no, I
before.
agree. Connie, I don't know who knows this answer, but I thought I read somewhere that the municipality or the town can also contribute funds with this. I mean, these are all federal funds, but the town has a surplus of money that wasn't spent last year. So, maybe if specifically there's identified, as Joe says, stuff that needs to be done, maybe the town can contribute to help make that happen. We're not talking with a municipality that had a huge deficit and we're trying to balance a budget. They've had a annual surplus. So, but for the most part, Joe, I got to say, I think some of this stuff is really more an issue of using taxpayer dollars that's already been taxed. That's all.
There may be more infrastructure stuff coming down the pike. We'll see. But this particular act is it's keyed to the COVID pandemic, and it is keyed to impacts and that are directly related. So I tend to agree with you, Matt, that this is not for just the wish list that hasn't happened. That is the responsibility of any municipality to be thinking about. This is really specific to COVID.
Well, absolutely, Connie. I agree with you 100%. But it is listed in the IFR plan, item number 4, to make necessary water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure investments. It says right there. So I mean, it can't be somebody can't come up with say, okay, I need a new coffee pot in the office for this. It's specifically covered. It's not like we're asking for recommendations for something out of the blue sky.
So let's see what we get. It's a limited pot of money. Let's see what we get and see how far it goes. And maybe there's room in what's left over. But I think that we have to make our needs assessment, because it's really not up to us how to actually spend it. It's up to us to figure out where the needs are. And I hear what you're saying, Joe, because I know that you're immediately going to say, well, that's why we're writing to the boards. And so I think, yes. Yeah. Let's go and draft the letter.
Absolutely. We're making recommendations. We're not doing we're not deciding. We're just making recommendations. And what better way to get recommendations is through the people that know these things.
Right. And we're not, we may make some recommendations, but really our charge is a needs assessment. It is to say, here are the needs that we found, not here's what we think you should spend the money on.
Well,
they're kind of the same thing, but it's really not up to us at all. What's up to us is to be able to elicit and then to communicate back the needs of the community.
Absolutely, we're all trying to improve improve the town. If can't, that's what we're here for.
Okay, so we're bumping up against 5:45, and I don't want to keep you over. I think as far as next steps for the next meeting, which is next Wednesday, we would really like to be able to make some decisions, or get 80% of the way on our survey. I will get a copy of the postcard from Jill Drew so that we know what Sharon is doing if it's ready. If it's not, I'll let you know. Joe, to have the draft of the letter would be great. Otherwise, I don't think I'm seeing any other next steps. Anything that I'm missing?
Don't think so.
What about the focus groups? What are we, what's the next step on those?
Well, I think I'd like to include Patricia in that conversation.
Oh.
But she'll know from reading the minutes that we hope to do them in January and that we're looking to do them in town hall and that we're looking to, to reach out to, if not hand select, a group of people that we know will have information as well as offer it out so that people can volunteer to be part.
Sounds good.
Anything else before we close?
Don't think so.
All right. 5:41. Thank you very much for being here. I look forward to seeing you next week and let us adjourn.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
you.
Connie.
Bye.